Hello, welcome back to Rev Endurance Sports and another edition of What is in Our Stand Today. Today we have a gentleman who has known of me for several years, and it's funny, when he came in, we reminisced about some of the ultra events that we have done and the events that he has crewed for and seen me out on the road. And one that came to mind was the 2009 Furnace Creek 508, which is a 500-mile ultra, so a nonstop race. And that year they had record headwinds through Death Valley of 40 to 60 mile an hour gusts and just steady at 30 to 40 miles an hour. So it was just a really, really bad year. And half of the solo field DNF'd, and 2 4-person teams DNF'd, and 4 2-person teams DNF'd. And it was a really, really bad windy section from mile 225 to like mile 325. So a 100-mile section through Death Valley and out the other end. And it was literally, so it's a 74-mile segment from Furnace Creek to Shoshone, and it took me 10 hours and 46 minutes. But I completed it, and at that time that would have been my 4th consecutive Furnace Creek 508.
Hawley and KHS order deadline.
And that's one of my reminders, because sometimes I get so focused on what I'm doing and working with customers or working on bikes that I forget to place an order. So, all right, without further ado, let's get to what is in our stand today. We have a Masi that came in for, well, it's got a creaky bottom bracket, so we troubleshot that, and I removed the crankset because I needed to place the order before I had enough time to do this video, spare time. So I had to place the order beforehand. And it turns out that these are just placed in there. It turns out that the non-drive side, so this is the drive side, but rather than to go all the way around the bike, we'll just use this one as an example. This is an older style BB30, so you can see the clips in here. And these are just pressed in there. And it's a metal, so an aluminum shell with a bearing pressed in there. Now, the biggest challenge with this BB30 technology, which, you know, Cannondale was the first, the inventor of it, I guess you would say, and then they licensed it out and all these other manufacturers started using it. But my biggest issue with them is they don't seal very well, and there's just always problems with creaky bottom brackets and stuff. And initially the concept was that if you use a 30 millimeter spindle, and by contrast the Shimano spindle is 24 millimeters. If you used a larger spindle and you made this distance, the bottom bracket shell, if you made that distance narrower, then you'd have a smaller shaft going across, and you would have bigger bearings. So it'd be a bigger opening, a bigger shaft going through the frame, and then you'd have a much narrower bottom bracket area, and they thought that would make it stiffer. But you know, the technology has evolved from here, and unfortunately it should actually go backwards, back to threaded bottom brackets. I'm a strong proponent of getting rid of the 30 millimeter spindles and having a threaded bottom bracket, because they last forever. It makes the customer happy to not have to deal with a creaky bottom bracket and all that stuff. And I'd rather have customers not come in as often because they're happy riding their bikes, as opposed to, you know, constantly wondering why their bottom bracket is creaking. And replacing bearings. And so what is also most common is the non-drive side bearing is almost always the one that goes bad, and the drive side bearing doesn't. All right, let's move on. So we have to replace his chain because it is worn. We're going to clean his drivetrain we're going to remove everything from the frame. I don't know that I mentioned that this is actually started out as a creaky bottom bracket, but he's interested in doing an overhaul. And normally overhauls are done in the low riding season, maybe, October, November, December, January. We're in July now, and he's motivated to ride, and he's got a young one at home, but he's going to try to find some time. So we're going to clean this bike thoroughly. We're going to remove all the components. We're going to replace all his cables and housing. And the gentleman wanted white cable and housing for his shifters and blue cable and housing for his brakes. So we are going to accommodate that. We're also going to replace the bar tape, of course. He's going to bring in the bar tape he's got, and we're also going to replace the brake pads. So this is going to be torn down, and I'll have another video as an in-progress video, and then a finishing video. So this is going to be a 3-part series. I've mentioned, if you follow my channel, I've mentioned before, I just don't have time to do the editing. I've got 6 bikes in here for repairs right now, and it's all I can do to take a 5 or 6 minute video that interrupts the flow of the actual turning of the wrench. Not to mention, I do all the ordering, I do all the business development, I do all the social media marketing, and so on and so forth. So I do appreciate that you have come on to the channel. Please give it a like, give it a share. If you got some comments, then I'd love to hear them. And I just wanted to add one last thing. So really the only way to know what's in your bike is to measure it. So if you have any doubt of what your bearings might be, the best thing is to measure them before you order them. You may have an old sample, but as we can see on this one here, there's just no etchings, there's no markings, and it's hard to find anything, any part number on them. So the best thing is you always just measure. You know exactly what you're measuring, you know exactly what you need to order, and then you can be rest assured that you'll have the correct part. Okay, thanks so much, and we'll see you on the road.